Good evening, everyone. To mark the phenomenal, remarkable work done by women in space industry, today I would like to talk about the second Indian-born woman to travel to outer space, Sirisha Bandla. Born in Guntur to Murlidhar and Anuradha Bandla, Sirisha spent her early childhood at the Reut known for its braided stream channels created by the Krishna and the other small rivers before joining her parents in Houston, Texas, the hub of America. Sirisha completed her Bachelor of Science in Aerospace, Aeronautical and Astronautical Engineering in 2011 from Crude University and went on to do her MBA from George Washington University in 2015. She joined Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic after completing her studies and is currently the Vice President of Government Affairs at the British American Spaceflight Company. Her passion for the space sector has seen her rise from the intern designing components for advanced aircraft at L3 Communications in Texas to joining the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. Sirisha's speech for opening a space travel for all puts the spotlight on the scarce representation of women in space missions. She has turned out to be a role model and youth icon for all the young girls having dreamed to start their careers in space industry. I would also like to thank Genex Space and D Space for collaborating us for the World Space Week and Outreach Program 2021. And also to mention, there is a special workshop on the topic of financial literacy for girls and women. Zoom links are already been provided, so please join us for the workshop. With this, I hand it over back to Mehak. Mehak, over to you.
Thank you, Ruchira, for giving us such an inspirational story. So, as Albert Einstein once said, a theory can be proved by experiment, but no path leads from experiment to the birth of theory. And so aptly describes the topic for today's panel discussion that is, theory and practical application go hand in hand. And I'm really elated to introduce to you our speakers for today. We have Chiara Cocchiara, who's aerospace engineer and CEO at iSpaceSchool. Then we also have Rachana Reddy with us, who's a space engineer and a podcaster. We have Reut Sorek, who's an astrobiologist and a researcher scientist at the Dead Sea and Arava Science Center. And we also have with us Sonal Asgotraa, who's a program leader at Astrostays. We are honored to have you all with us today. And to moderate this amazing panel, we have Dr. Garima Patel with us. She's a senior psychotherapist with 10 plus years of experience in clinical neurological rehabilitation. She's the founder director of Movement Inspiration Private Limited and currently involved in research related to functional recovery after spinal cord injury, stroke, and other neurological conditions. Her research interests also include human performance in space, particularly effects of altered gravity on the human body, exercise, countermeasures, and women health in space. I'm glad that you're with us today, Garima. And now I request Dr. Garima to come up here and moderate the panel discussion. Dr. Garima, you are on mute. Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm not. Hello? Am I
Yeah,
audible?
you're audible now. Yeah, you're audible now.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. Without wasting much of your time, let me begin with welcoming the astronaut females from the space industry for this panel discussion. Now, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our first guest, Rachana Reddy Madimi. She holds a master degree in space engineering from Technical University Berlin and another master degree in space and telecommunication laws from Nalsad University of Law, India. Currently, she is a satellite development engineer with Berlin Space Technologies in Germany. She has previously worked with space agencies of India and Germany as well. And she also hosts a podcast series featuring casual comic conversations with people who are working on all things about space. Hello, Rachna, and pleased to have you here. Next,
Hey
we have an
Garima, thank you very much for the nice introduction.
Yeah. Next, we have an astrobiologist, Ruet Sorek Abramovich, who is currently working at the Dead Sea and Arava Science Center, Israel. Her area of research includes extremophile adaptations and cross-contamination challenges in future planetary exploration. At present, she is also head of science education at Young Astronaut Academy Program, co-founder and current chairperson of Israel Mars Society, and she has played a number of significant roles in past, like former director of NSW chapter in Mars Society Australia, former chief scientist and co-founder of DMARS, analog astronaut, public speaker, co-lecturer of space studies program on astrobiology at International Space University, and much more. She was also a participant in NASA's Spaceward Bound Field Expedition in South Australia. And in 2020, she was invited to participate in the US Department of State International Visitor Leadership Program. Pleasure to have you here, Reut. I feel privileged to welcome Sonal Asgotraa. She is the program leader of Astrostays, a unique community-centric astrotourism model that leverages astronomy for creating sustainable socio-economic development opportunities for rural communities by transforming village homestays into cultural and astronomy hubs and economically empowering rural communities. Sonal was also a team member of the 2013 International Antarctic Expedition, which is led by polar explorer Sir Robert Swan. We are glad to have you with us today, Sonal. And finally, we will also be having Chiara Cocchiara, who will be joining us for the discussion in some time.
Thank you so much, Garima, and very nice to be on the panel. And hello, everyone.
So, to begin with, as we all know, communication is an integral part in every sector. And when it comes to space, it's all about satellites. So, I'm very keen to ask this particularly to you, Rachana. Like, apart from satellites, what are the other space age technologies and platforms that could be viable for communication according to you?
Hey, thanks for the nice question, Garima. So, I mean, we all know that Leo constellations are coming up. Starlink has already launched, and a lot of regional powers are also regional. A lot of geographies are also planning their own Leo's constellations for communication to bring broadband from the internet. But actually, there are a couple of other companies which are also trying to do something else in terms of communication. So, some companies, what they're trying to do is they're trying to bring internet to space, right? So they want to have a kind of internet for all the satellites, all the space assets out there, which is, I find it quite incredible. That again has a lot of ramifications on the satellite design. So now you don't need to have any ground stations, right? So you just need so you just need to find the nearest satellite. So let's say I am a satellite orbiting. I find the nearest satellite and then beam my data, and then that will take care of all the data reaching the ground. So that way, there's a lot of interesting, exciting things happening in terms of space communication as well. And there's what I really believe is, speaking of space applications, there's a huge plethora. There's amazing potential that's yet to be tapped into, and I really hope a lot of Indian startups, there are a lot of Indian startups which are doing exciting things. I hope they really tap into it and figure this out. Hope I've answered your question.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for those insights. And I believe that communication indeed is an asset for even for the deep space exploration as well, if I'm not wrong. So,
Yes, definitely. So when we speak of space communication, one is using space assets, as in satellites, for terrestrial communication. And the other is, of course, when you're communicating to even, the edge of space as we know it. There are these Voyager probes that have been going for many decades. And it's mesmerizing that we're still able to talk to these things. So humanity basically has ice out there so far away. That's fabulous. And this also heralds a kind of every time a rocket is launched, right? So every time a rocket is launched by any country from any part of the world, we collaborate. For example, India launches a rocket. We ask our neighboring countries, because they have set up these communication ground stations, to relay the information to us. That way, space really unites all the countries in the world. And even Mangalyaan and the Chandrayaan missions that were on the moon and the Mars, we also rely on the deep space network of the US and a lot of other countries. So that way, there's this amazing camaraderie. There's a lot of, we go beyond this geopolitics. We go beyond every other difference there is, and we collaborate at that level. So that way, space really brings us together. I can go on and on, about space communication,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah.
So actually, building upon this, one aspect of deep space exploration is that it could help us discover the origins of life on Earth. So, Reut, uh, what do you think? Like, what could be the biggest impact of us as a species when discovering these origins? Uh, Reut, you're on mute.
You. Thank you very much. I wanted to say how wonderful it is to be here today, and I could listen to Rachana talking all day long. By the way, that was a beautiful introduction to the whole communication issue, which is a big issue. Actually, you summed it up very nicely. Thank you. And so, finding origin on a different planet. So, astrobiology is a multidisciplinary science. You can talk about the beginning of life. You can talk about evolution of life. You can talk about extremophiles, habitability, and so on and so forth. At the moment, we know only about life from planet Earth, and we are a very proud people, proud species, and we're not humble enough in order to understand what will happen to our egos when we understand that thing happened someplace else. So for me, as an astrobiology working on extremophiles, I'm very much aware, like everybody else in my field, that microorganisms, let's say bacteria, viruses, even small fungi species, are highly adaptable to extreme environments. The biggest life form I know about that it's able to withstand extreme environments is, of course, tardigrade. And if we find anything like that elsewhere, I think it will have a profound effect on my field, specifically on astrobiology. And I think biologists everywhere would be shouting with happiness, because compare us to physicists or to chemistry, right? They know that their factors are working just as fine in the rest of the universe, right? So, the speed of light and whatever other thing that you're talking about from a physical point of view, it works the same everywhere in the universe. Life, not a single evidence yet to anything that works like the biology on planet Earth. So for me, of course, I would be thrilled. I think it would change the field forever. And it should change our egos and make us a bit more humble. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
That's a valuable thought, I must say, about it. And you know what? Recently, when I have joined Space Force, so I was involved in a research which is related to the space tourism as well. So when we talk about communication, we talk about origins and so on. So now the next boom in the industry is about space tourism. So now, since we know that space is going to affect men and women differently, so now what you expect will be the advancements in the near future when it comes to space tourism, and specifically when I talk about females, do you think it is going to be different, or some set of settings or some advancements particularly for females to be included more, or at least to have in gender equality in space?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Garima. And I think it kind of hits home a very deep point, something that has been debated for ever now. And our work is primarily in astrotourism. I mean, which is kind of comes under the space tourism. But I think that if I talk specifically about astrotourism, I think. One of the things that the way it can affect men and women differently is the fact that how accessible the skills that you actually require for that kind of astrotourism to happen on the ground are actually being given to men and women differently. And through our work in Ladakh in Himalayas, what we have seen is that the way science is actually being made inclusive and equitable is probably not the same way as it should have been for men and women. So I think one advancement with respect to astrotourism that I would say that we would definitely expect in the near future is making it more inclusive and equitable. And for space tourism specifically, I'm an electrical engineer, and I understand more voltage and current. But what we have always kind of understood is that the space suits, they are kind of designed more for for the men's body and not for women's body, and something that has been an eternal debate. So I hope that when it comes to space tourism, there are customizations and personalizations actually done that suits women.
Garima,
Yeah.
can I quickly chip in a little bit here?
Yes, of course you can.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Sonal, she's definitely a higher expert than I am in terms of space tourism, or given her analog experience. But yeah, when I often think about men and women in space, astronauts, I've always wondered, why is it that men have been evolved, as in why the narrative is towards men, right? Because if we actually look at men and women, in terms of strictly in terms of thinking as an engineer who tries to optimize for payload, women actually make better candidates, better astronauts, right? Because usually we're smaller, you have a smaller body size for the same amount of brain capability. Women typically consume fewer resources, so you need to take less water and less food for them. And women are also, they have the greatest gift of being able to reproduce in space. So assuming that humanity eventually wants to go to space and populate the other planets, I always thought it just makes more sense to to have started with women. And then I find this amazing movie. So in the 1920s, the Germans have made this movie called Frau im Mond. It translates to women on moon, women on the moon. And it basically, back in the 20s, right? So they took a rocket scientist, they consulted a rocket scientist, and they made this movie. And the movie is about a woman who gets on a rocket and goes to the moon, and how she feels, the social isolation, and all these things, typical astronaut experiences. So I think somewhere along the lines, the genders got reversed. So I really think women should make better payloads. uh,
But you know what, Rachna, when I'm actually very much interested in women's health in space, particularly if I talk about, okay, so I have gone into deep and searched about the engineering aspects, even the architectural aspect, because when you send someone out there, you have to look into everything. I always wonder, why does the engineer was more favored toward men? I mean, if you see these spacesuits, if you see the urine collection devices and everything, now they are more suited to the men and not for the women. And now, even when the pandemic is there, okay, now being in the medical field, if you see even the PPE kit, those are not good for the women. I mean, how bad is that?
I
Can
think it
anyone
all
of you
started with
speak on
the.
this?
I think it all started with the Gagarin, right? So back when Yuri Gagarin and the Russians were sending the astronauts, it was basically these fighter pilots whom they were sending, and back then the fighter pilots were all men. So it might have started from that,
And they
but
were short men as well.
yes, smaller. Yes, Yuri was picked because he was shorter and smaller.
I perfectly agree with you. And here we go with Chiara Cocchiara. Hi, Chiara.
Hi everyone, how are you doing?
Good. And I would just like to introduce you to everyone. Now, she is an aerospace engineer having 3 master's degree in aerospace engineering and MBA, and currently she is enrolled in PhD. In past, she has played roles of crew commander and crew engineers of Mars Analog mission with Mars Society and experiments from NASA. Forbes has listed her 30 under 30 leader in the category industry. She has received IAF Young Space Leaders Award in 2020 for her contribution to IAF and space sector. She was also awarded the MIT Innovator Under 35 and the ESNC prizes for a new drone technology that she designed to help saving human lives. In 2019, she was also awarded the Atlantic Dialogue Emerging Leader and the German Italian Young Leader titles. She volunteers for the SGAC, that is the Space Generation Advisory Council, since 2015, and currently covers the role of Space Ops Manager. She is a part of Space Ops Committee, where she leads the Space Ops Students and Young Professional Program. So, Chiara, we were just discussing about communication. Then we went to origins of life, and now we are finally moved on to women in space. And we were talking like how injustice is happening or nothing is in favor of women. So, for you particularly, since you have joined now, I would like to ask your opinion on one key technological development you think we will need in at least next 10 years to really drive the industry.
I thank you very much, first of all, for the introduction, Garima, very kind. Technology, I think the world is really moving towards the usage of artificial intelligence. That's really the basis, and even in the space sector, we see it using more and more. And this applies both to the space segment and the ground segment. So whether we talk about satellites themselves or the way that we monitor them, command them, and even the way after we get the data, how we process data and how we disseminate data. It's really important that artificial intelligence is there, and really it is increasing a lot the way that space agencies and industries are using it. To quote a colleague from ESA, the more satellites we launch in space, the more important is the need for them to be intelligent somehow. So we use we talk about constellation, we talk about satellites communicating with each other, and to have artificial intelligence and machine learning, of course, computers on board, it's really helping a lot. And I think this is the basis for any development in the technology field that we will have in the space sector.
Thank you so much. But then, thinking about technology and every other aspect, so down the line, somewhere this space law is expected to evolve. And so, my next question is, when can we see a comprehensive legal regime which can be applicable to space as well as to exploration? Because as of now, we lack it. So, what are your thoughts on this? Anyone, if you can just jump in and,
Maybe I
go
can
ahead.
start and then
Yeah.
anyone else. Oh, sorry,
Then
Rachana,
others.
you go. You go.
Yeah, please go ahead, Chiara. Please go ahead. I'd love to hear what you
Okay.
got to say.
I'm not a space lawyer expert at all. I really work more on the technological aspect. But from what we see is that everyone is launching satellites in space nowadays. So from anywhere in the world, we have countries that want to operate in space, and not only governments, but now more and more the private companies want to use orbits to use satellite for other purposes. And of course, at this moment, I think we are still lacking on the regulations. We have some. We have International Institute of Policy in the space law. We have a strong basis, so we are starting in that direction. But there is still a lot to be done, and it has to be clear to everyone that regulations are there to be respected, and there is a reason why we need them. I mean, the space debris issue is an important one. Everyone is aware of it, and only with the strong regulations we will be able to overcome it. Apart from the technological point of view, of course, if we are able to remove them from space. But yes, I believe that still there is a lot to be done in this respect on the space law point of view.
Yeah, just building a little bit on what Chiara has said. Of course, I completely agree. There's a lot to be done. So if you look at the space international law, it's similar to international law, right? So it's similar to maritime law or the law we follow on the high seas, where the high seas are not the property of any country. They do not come under the jurisdiction of any country. So thereby, I mean, from the 50s, from the 60s, when the space race was on, when the world was quite bipolar, we started off with a lot of treaties. And what's interesting to note is that if you look at the treaties, first there came this outer space treaty, which was like very, very generic and which explicitly prevented weaponization of space. And this treaty came immediately after one of the two powers put a satellite in space, essentially, right? Because if you can put a satellite in space, that means you can put a nuclear warhead in space. And immediately to counteract that, to prevent that from actually happening, there was this first law. And then when the human went up in space, and then we started thinking about, oh, we should have a rescue convention. What if an asset, a human or anybody, or just a piece of payload lands in somebody else's territory? Who has the claims? Because you don't want your technology to be, taken apart and reverse engineered by the other country. So that way, law has always been playing catch up to technology in space. And so unfortunately we haven't so it would what would be really amazing is, for example, if we look at the civil aviation, right? It's nice to look at these parallels, because civil aviation, we have airlines operating across the world, speaking different languages. The pilots are speaking different languages. The airport authorities, there's a difference in the infrastructure, there's a difference in technology, there's a difference in languages, local laws. But in spite of that, we have a really seamless way of regulating this airline traffic. So something akin to that in space would be fantastic. But the question here is who is going to spearhead it? Because earlier it's major. If you look at all the earlier space treaties, right, they've all been drafted by the UNUSA, United Nations Office of Outer Space Activities, and all the member states were party to it. But now it's less and less the government who is initiating a lot of these satellite space activity. It's more the private players. So the question is who is going to spearhead it, especially when if you must have seen the news, right? Like Starlink satellites, for example, they were on a collision course with an ESA, one of the ESA satellites. And one fun fact is the ISS, the International Space Station, every week on a weekly basis, it has to alter its orbit. So essentially, it's dodging space debris in space, right? So it's playing dodgeball every week with space. So the problem is rising. It's really required for us to regulate it better. However, on the other hand, the positive thing is there are a lot of companies across the world which are trying to actively map and try to mitigate. And they're also amazing. This Japanese company, Astroscale, right? These guys are, and a bunch of other companies which are trying to actively remove. They tried an experiment. They threw out a fishing net and then try to reduce the space debris. So there've been like there's a lot going on in terms of technology, in terms of technological solutions. So that's the near Earth orbit. And speaking of space law on Mars or on other planets or in deep space, that's I think a completely different ballgame because no country really wants to, so essentially we're in this. So I think the space fraternity is kind of divided. On one hand, people want to go there and like plant a flag and say, hey, this resource belongs to me. I want to take all these resources back. I want to do mining. And on the other hand, people are advocating for, hey, let's not screw up outer space like we did it on Earth. Let's not destroy it as much. And another thing that's interesting that's happening is Luxembourg and US. Apparently, they're the only two countries which have a very explicit law, right? So they've passed a law saying any space. Any invention that's made in space or anything that's made in space is the intellectual property, is actually the property of the country or the company which did it. And the same applies to space resources as well. So this way, I'm pretty sure it's going to take another, 5 or 10 years because we are all so divided. We have very different approaches. We are so divided. So yeah, I'm also actually excited to see how it all is going to pan out. Garima, you're muted.
Thank you so much. So you have almost covered all the areas of policies and space law where we can expect it to evolve, and all those theoretical aspects which you want us to be implemented practically. So now you all belong to different zones of space industry. Now one common question to you all: how do you think we'll see space will be applied to our daily lives? Like we say, all these activities which are going on is going to serve the humankind. So what are your thoughts? Maybe we can start with Reut and Sonal and so on. We can follow up, right?
Yes, I mean, already space is very much applicable in terms of internet and video and TV and, of course, weather forecast and so on and so forth. I think there's going to be a big boost in IoT and Internet of Things, how you manage a lot of the things in a micro scale on big fields or really big areas using actually very simple protocols in IoT. But what I see with commercial space, and especially with the recent developments, with the Russian film crew and the Inspiration 4 crew and Tom Cruise future crew and all that, is actually that I'm going to guess that from a social point of view, you're going to see a lot more social media and relatable people going up to space. So you're going to see it a lot more in your own news, in your own TV, things about people that you wouldn't have thought before could go to space, all of a sudden going to space. So that's going to, in social media, that's going to explode I'm pretty sure in the next few years and so on and so forth. And you're going to see a lot of interesting NGOs trying to make donations and get funding to do good stuff using these type of, space exploration issues. For me as a scientist, I still do not see a really good breakthrough because the prices to do science are still very, very high. And basically there's thousands and thousands of scientists who would love to do experiments in space, who would love to do it related to planetary science on the moon and so on, but it's a very expensive business for us. So for me personally, I do not feel any breakthrough yet, but I'm still hoping, and I'm looking forward for the next phase. Thank you.
Yeah, so I would say that, since much of our work is in rural areas where we work with, really remote off-grid communities, space technologies would basically entail making life easier on Earth. Couple of things that come to my top of the head is high power and efficiency solar cells, which are a product of satellite development. I mean, we still have more than, I think, the last figure that I saw through the census data was 795 million people who are still without electricity, and the world is now moving away from fossil fuel-based power to actually clean energy access. And all of this, high power and efficiency solar cells are actually the way to go. And our work, what we have seen is that all of these remote areas, I think there's a great opportunity to bring clean energy and move away from this fossil fuel based and AC power grids to actually have these solar microgrids which can empower these villages through electricity. And of course, the second point is the high-speed internet and communication access. I mean, it's a main point is communication changes lives and it opens us to the world. And all of these remote areas, they still are either dependent on a satellite phone, or they have to, because in Himalayas, I am taking an example from there again. So one has to trek probably a couple of days to a nearby city or a nearby area which has a phone or an internet connectivity, and then kind of get in touch with the world. So maybe high speed internet and communication access would have be a great way to actually make life easy back on Earth. Thanks.
Yes, I don't say anything too different from what both Sonal and Reut said, because we talk about what is called the space economy. So the space economy is already there. We saw the space sector is already impacting our daily lives, not only from the social perspective, bringing benefits, but also from the economic perspective. There is a global impact of almost 400 billions of dollars linked to the space sector, and this, of course, as a consequence to all our lives. But mainly from the social perspective, we see that there are numerous startups that are born in the sector all around the world, and they really address specific problems. So we talked about lack of electricity, but we need to talk about safety in the workplace, for example, when we can help people going out from the railway tracks and be saved, for example. We talk about agriculture. There are many countries that still live on agriculture, and the way that space can help us improving that, it's really a big impact. Telemedicine, finance, we really see that space is already and is moving towards a bigger impact in our social aspect.
Yeah, Garima, I think I've already spoken a lot more than my share.
You can still go ahead. You can still go ahead.
Actually, you have very interesting other questions. So would you like to move on? They're also very interesting.
So if you're fine with it, yeah, I'll jump into your area of interest and your skills, because that's what we want to hear from you, because that's your experience. You have felt it somewhere or some point of time in your life. So shall I go ahead with that?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, so my next question, first question goes to Chiara. How was your experience, while applying theoretical knowledge for the roles of crew commander and crew engineer of Mars analog mission when you have been there as, part? So how was your experience? Was it really different from, theory, practical? Because there's a lot of chaos goes on when we as a student, we jump into the field as a practitioner. So we feel there's a huge difference between it. Now, when it comes to analog mission, was it the same or it was different?
Yes, I mean, it is, as you say, that there are differences, and it is a beautiful differences because it was even better than what I expected to do when I was going to go there. We are engineers, and we know that we try to make procedures for everything, and we try to avoid risk to happen, any issues to happen. So there is a lot of planning anyway, and we do a lot behind and before going there. Also, there is a lot of preparations from the psychological point of view, not only technical point of view, because we were going to be fully isolated for a long period of time, almost without internet, without being able to talk to the families. And we also had issues from a technical point of view, and you know that you are alone. You are there and you need to solve it by yourself. And it was interesting for me because I played these two roles. As an engineer, I took more the role of technical aspect there. But then we were rotating between us as a crew commander, and there you feel more in the management point of view. So thinking not about yourself, but thinking about the team, what everyone has to do, and how to motivate. The last thing that I would like to mention, and I think this is really important, it's that independently from a procedures or engineering perspective or differences between theory and practice, we are a team, and this is the same that happened in the International Space Station. They work as a team, so each of us has a role, but we work together for the same mission, and that was really the most beautiful part of all of it.
It's so wonderful to hear this, Chiara.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah. Uh, and this, I am really looking forward for this particular thing, the podcast series. So, Rachna, how important it is to connect and talk with like-minded people that might generate new ideas. Because when we say single person, it's just one brain. When we have many, so we have many brains generating beautiful ideas which we would have never thought of, and those will go build up in a huge idea. So what is your experience in this?
Yeah, that's a nice question, Garima. So thanks for mentioning my podcast. It's called Those Space People. Um, so yeah, it's I completely agree. It's fascinating to talk with like-minded people, like like people like you today's panel, and also people who have been working in exactly the same area that I work on, which is satellites and flight software, all that stuff. So, and especially given that us space people are quite, we're quite outliers, a little crazy and nerdy and geeky to the rest of the world. So it's always fantastic to connect with like-minded people. I get, of course, you have a lot of support in terms of you get to know about latest technologies. You get sometimes you share any kind of bug or any problem or any challenge that you're trying to solve. It's it kind of gets resolved very quickly. But that said, I think it's also very important to speak to unlike minded people, so people who are slightly different but in the space domain itself. And that's important because often when people outside the space industry look at people who are working in the space industry, they club everybody together under this very broad term called rocket scientists, right? But unfortunately, everyone working in the space industry kind of works in silos. So for example, if I am a satellite engineer, I have no clue what's happening under the hood of a rocket. And the same, and both of us have absolutely no clue what's happening with the satellite image, like who's using it, how are you processing it, what's the end user getting out of it. So this way, I feel that within the space industry are so isolated from each other, and it's extremely important to speak to people across the value chain in different domains and different verticals. So one is not only we understand the pain points of the other person, and we also get to empathize with them, but then it acts as a kind of like a feedback loop, right? So if for example, if I know the pain point of let's say you attach a satellite to a rocket, and then your ejection mechanism, right? So when it reaches the orbit, it has to like eject, And the person who's actually working on the structure of the satellite, and the person who's like doing that ejection mechanism, and the rocket scientist who's actually working on the rocket. So if these three people work together, then there's a lot of pain points that you understand, that you empathize, and then you come up with a much better design that makes life easier for all three of them. And similarly, if I talk to somebody who's actively using the satellite imagery on a daily basis, then I'll know what kind of optimizations I can do on board and do the processing for this person, rather than dumping the entire image on this person, and then letting them figure it out. So that way, there's a lot of synergies that can be worked out within the space sector while talking to slightly, unlike minded people. So that is within the space sector. Not only that, I think it's also very important for people working in space to talk to people from outside of the space sector, because ultimately the applications of space are to serve the people who are on the ground right now. So ultimately the money comes from the ground, the applications are intended for the people on the ground. So I think it's really important to talk to people from different sectors and see how space as an infrastructure can benefit them. And that said, I've had different kinds of people on my podcast. I also have one space architect. So this she designs these habitation modules. I mean, since Garima is so excited about living off the planet Earth and about deep space exploration, so she builds these habitation modules, and it's fascinating because she's an architect and she brings a very architectural perspective to building it, which engineers don't really have. Right? Engineers are always like trying to solve problems, and they're not very, they don't really think of the human factors when you're designing something. And I also had a space archaeologist. I was very surprised that somebody who was doing space archaeology is working in space. So that way, it's fascinating to meet people from different walks of life within the space sector, outside the space sector, and try to make the world a better place for everyone.
So excited to hear this. And architecture, yeah, one of my area of interest as well, though I don't work, but I love to read upon that. And next we jump on to the astrobiology. So Reut, how extremophile adaptations can really affect the future planetary exploration according to you?
So one of the things my lab is now researching in the Arava and Dead Sea Science Center, we're actually looking at extremophile from the Dead Sea that would be able to use the leftovers of hydrogen from rocket fuel. And hopefully all the tank fuels, let's say you put a rocket or you put a spaceship onto the moon, and then you have all these fuel tanks. Some of them can be reused as bioreactors. So one of the things that we're looking at is using extremophile in combination with other microorganisms, for instance, algae, for instance, cyanobacteria. And we want to operate within these tank fuels at some low level of hydrogen, which is an extremely, extremely toxic substance. But they seem to be handling it very well. And if they're continuing to handle it very well, then the combination between them and the algae and the cyanobacteria will be available to support life support system and ECLES system. So we will be able to produce perhaps a bit of oxygen. A lot of people are using today, for instance, spirulina, which is a cyanobacteria and a really well-known organism, as a booster for nutrients. So you add it as a food supplement. And if you're living at the moon and you need to live off the land somehow, then having a bioreactor in this fashion would be very, very beneficial to astronauts living on the moon or Mars or in other places which need to reuse these fuel tanks. Later on in next years, I hope to also check these extremophiles and their abilities to use and utilize different types of rocket fuel, because hydrogen is only one of many. And that's how I feel extremophiles can help us in space. Yes, just open your mic again. Yes.
I'm so sorry. It's always with
No
me.
problem.
So thank you so much. But we'll move on to the next, I guess, very near and dear area is how space, we have to rise above the individual level and think of the community, right? So my next question is for Sonal. Like, how do you think we can ensure a sustainable future in space while empowering rural communities? Because that's what your area or you care for. That's the area. Sonal, you are on mute now.
Oh, yes, I think it happens once a day at least. All right. So what I was saying was that sustainability probably is like one of the most overused words on the planet today. People talk about sustainable development. They talk about sustainable tourism, sustainable travel, but I'm not really sure that if everybody understands what sustainability actually means. To me personally, having worked with communities that have been off grid and all of in these remote areas of the world. To me, sustainability personally really means treading your path in a responsible manner and not living as if there's no tomorrow. And I think that the one of the way that we can actually ensure that rural communities are empowered. Personally, I think that the word empowerment is really speaking from a very high moral ground. You cannot really empower someone. You can give them tools and skills to actually move forward in life. And when we started on the community based astrotourism model, and when we were speaking to people around to see that if we could break away from the traditional models which are very science based, and they are kind of the core of the entire experience is scientific institution or scientific experiences. People were like, okay, villagers explaining the skies to people, cute. Like, that's not cute. You know what cute is? The fact that there is this group of women who have absolutely no background in space or astronomy, and actually learning what the night skies mean, what it has to offer, and storytelling and weaving it with their own indigenous tales, that actually bringing new kind of revenue generation to their communities. Actually something that I call as empowerment is. So I think it basically would mean making science more inclusive and accessible and equitable, and that's how you can actually show the kind of real impact that science can have or space can have on ground. Thanks.
Thank you, Sonal. And I really like the word equity, because that's what I advocate when I talk about women's in health, equity. So, yeah, moving ahead, I have a common question for all of you. Unfortunately, Chiara has to move on and she will be joining us very shortly. So, we can start off with any one of you with the answer. So, if you were given an opportunity to empower women in space, how would you do that?
Can I? Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm very much involved in also in STEM education and that kind of projects here in Israel. So I know exactly how I would do it. And basically what I would do, I would absolutely have a mixed group of female and males. I will train them as astronauts. I'll make them work as a team, which is an important part. And Chiara was talking about it before, and it's a shame she's not here, but she's going to join us in a minute. And I would go through, after teaching them about space sciences, for instance, and space architecture, for instance, and things like that. And after doing a lot of team building exercises, I would be able to take them to a very brief but very powerful analog mission experience. And once you put women in commander situation, just as Chiara was talking about, and when they need to fix things and help others, and when they need to know when to lead and when not to be led, that's also a very important. When to be, very stressful and how to relax. So after they know and they have all this knowledge about space because they learned it before, and how to work in a team and how to be in this stressful situation, it doesn't have to be very long. It could be 3-4 days tops. After they do that, they go back to their communities, right? They go back to their communities and they're a different person. And that's what I want to have. I really want to have women who gain that experience, had the support financially and physically and environmentally, because a lot of us come from traditional countries where the place of the women is with the house, it's with the family, and just going for, an analog mission. For some people, it's out of this world, let alone space. And after I would have several groups of these types of women, and they came back to their community and became some sort of an authority within their own community, I would love to pick one or two and just put them on a Virgin Galactic spaceship or on a SpaceX spaceship and really, really give them the experience of a lifetime and make sure they get to space for even a day or two. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. I think they come back to their communities as heroes, as leaders, as role models, as someone who's done it in the big world. That's really important, actually, for a lot of women in different countries, in different situations. And that's exactly what I would do. I would have groups, I would train them, I would do analog missions, and eventually, if I had the funds, I would pick several of them and join them into a real space mission. Basically, that's what I would do. Thank you. Sonal, do you want to add to that? I'm sure you have, the field better than I do, even.
So, of course, I mean, thanks. I am just wondering how to follow up on what you said. I mean, you articulated all of that so brilliantly. I would say that maybe start them young. There's an anecdote, that I have from, Ladakh. We were doing these workshops where we were training some community leaders on basics of astronomy, how to use a telescope, what the skies, basically entail, and how to read them, etc. And there was a very elderly woman, I would say probably in her late 70s, who actually came over, to have a look from the telescope, and she was so old that she had to be held by, both her arms. And when we took her, got her to the telescope, and she put her eye on the eyepiece, and she looked at the moon, and the only thing that she wanted to see was the moon. And when she looked at it, she looked at all of us. I think we were like 6 or 7 people standing in the background. She said, "Is that the moon?" Like, yes, that's the moon. Then she went back again and she, I see something. So basically, she was referring to the craters and all of those things. I see something. There are some spots. I'm like, yes, that's the moon. And it's like, oh, I thought that in her mind, moon was some really sacred entity, something that could never be seen, or something that was like absolute in oblivion. And then she turned and she said, "Oh wow, maybe I could have, if I could have gone back in time and read science earlier, maybe." So I would say that maybe really start them young and give them more access than they really need to be.
Yes,
That's
I can
the
only.
question. Yeah, the question
Sorry,
was if.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Reut. Yeah. Okay, Rachana. So the question was for everyone that if you were given an opportunity to empower women in space, how would you do that?
Yeah, so just commenting a little bit of on what Sonal said. You painted such a beautiful picture of this scene, right? And it really took me back to the first time I had seen the moon through a telescope, and then the Saturn rings. Oh my God, the Saturn rings. I think it's really a must-have experience for every child, every adult, everybody. You have to see the Saturn rings through the telescope. It's incredible. So having said that, actually, one of the biggest reasons I've started my podcast is, if you listen to the podcast, if you see the episodes, it's predominantly women. So the reason I started it is not only to paint a complete picture of this entire ecosystem with people in at different points in their career, because usually when we hear from people working in space, it's often the heads of companies, or like a CEO, or astronauts, or heads of space agencies. Very rarely do we get to hear from people who are at different points in their career, who are doing amazing things on an everyday basis. So I try to take as many women as possible onto my podcast. I try to have women on my show, and just to paint the picture, to give more role models to women, that you can be a physics major and still do something incredible in space. You can be a civil engineer and do amazing things in space. You can be anything and
you can be a musician. You can be a musician and do incredible things in space. That's part of the thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Agreed. Yeah. That's why I guess artists are being in demand now. In space.
Completely, yes, because art is essentially trying to portray the world with different eyes, with a completely different perspective. And artists, of course, they're the ones who do this. And even Nicole Stott, one of the panelists we are going to have in one of the sessions, she's an artist, and it was an amazing session. I had a conversation with her. So I guess we all need to have more presence in space, more role models, more women characters in the movies we make about space, and have more visibility, essentially.
So that's why I guess the space is evolving with artists, not only the STEM, now it is STEAM because of the artist, I guess. So correct if I'm wrong.
I like that. I definitely steal that from you and quote it a lot of places. I'll also give you credit. STEAM is awesome.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing actually everywhere now. It's not STEM, it is STEAM, and they will be focusing on arts and artists nowadays. Even the private companies who are providing free tickets, they are also seeking like artists. So what would you do as an artist is the main question when they want to select you. That's why I said that it's not
I
STEM,
can,
it's STEAM.
I can belly dance as well. Just saying.
So just
You know,
imagine how belly dance will be looking in, microgravity or zero gravity.
Exactly.
there goes a PhD topic, the mechanics and the physics of belly dancing and microgravity.
Of course, and as a physiotherapist, I'll join to see the biomechanics and postural control as well.
This is a
So
research grant. We can write it right now. I can assure you that. All of us together. Thank you.
now, yeah, I think so. We will do that together. So yeah, I guess we are coming to an end of this particular session, and I must say what an insightful session, at least for me it was. Okay, and before closing this particular session, I just want to brief, because we were talking about theory and practical, and what future might get us. So I guess we have come a long way, from translating frictional images of space travel into reality. Is the background noise too much? And so while the fundamental theoretical mathematics of space travel, it was established somewhere in 1687, it took decades for the first human space flight. But since it took so much long time, there has been many breakthroughs in this field. And here, I'm not at all pendulous to say that with you all, who all are present with me together, it will be continued, and we will see many more such breakthroughs because of your contribution. And thank you so much for your precious time, for your thoughts, for your experiences, sharing not only with me but with everyone out here. And I would also like to thank SSERD for giving me this opportunity to interact with these four amazing women in space. I'm so thankful, and definitely looking forward for more such insightful sessions with you all. Thank you so much, and over to you, Mehek.
Yeah, thank you, Garima, and I will really love to thank all the. Yeah. Yeah, it was so great to have you all like talk about such great things. Like when Reut mentioned about astrobiology, that's something new to me as well. Like I'm just an undergraduate, so like as she mentioned, like there is something known as extremophiles, where microorganisms can be combined with them to make something like drastic like oxygen or something like that. That's so much amazing to know, because right now what we actually depend on are just like few resources which are already available in earth, and we're almost like exhausting those resources. So I guess adopting such kind of measures would definitely help everybody. And also I love like a lot of points which Rachana mentioned, like the space communication itself, it's such a new technology, and there's so much opportunities for all the youngsters who want to work in this field. And then there's so many companies who tend to not just like work in space communication, but also like improve space for us, like by removing space debris and everything. And how we should connect with not just like-minded people but also like unlike-minded people, so that we have like more of innovative ideas. We can just think about different aspects that are actually required. So yeah, I love that point completely. And that how you all talked about that we need models for us, who can just support us, who can guide us. And as Ruth mentioned that she would actually put in so many women into groups and just help them to explore so many different fields. It was so inspiring. It was just so inspiring for us. And also to mention about what like Sonal mentioned, that customization and prioritization is so much essential in today's day, when we talk especially about like space tourism and everything. It's just so much necessary. And that how they work to and how she's like probably thinking about working in connecting women who have got like no background in space, and still connecting them, and like giving them an idea that they should start from the very beginning at the earlier stage, because the earlier women start, the earlier they have brighter knowledge, they can just then gather more support from us, from people like, not us, but from people like you're such good role models for them. And and that's exactly where we need equity. As she mentioned, equity is in equity will be there, then we'll have so many women out there. And also with and also like one more great point what Chiara mentioned, though she's not here with us, but then like about the technology like machine learning, I think that's a new field, though I have just started like working with it for like a month ago, so don't know much about it. But then obviously she told us like how machine learning is definitely like helping in technology advancement and everything, and we can just be there, we can help everybody, and there's so much uh, that needs to be worked upon still about the social and the global aspects of lives in space. And coming to again women in space, which is the major concern for an entire world space week, and how we can ensure proper safety to women, and help them to work as a team, so that it'll be beneficial for all of us. So yes, with that, I thank everybody who joined us in today's panel and gave us such insightful thoughts about how we can just work together. And special thanks to Garima also for moderating such a nice panel, inspiring all of us. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful panel.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Please
Thanks.
find me on LinkedIn and Facebook. I'd be happy to connect.
That's
Thank you so
what.
much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so guys, I guess you've been extremely inspired. You want to explore so much about so different fields. So moving ahead, I would now like to share my screen and talk about tomorrow's event. Okay, I'll just share my screen. So I'm honored to thank our sponsor, GenX Space. So again, talking about GenX Space, it's an educational tech company that's dedicated to creating and providing high-quality all-round space education and services for students and institutions. So it was formed with the key takeaways of SSERD, that is the space education and an outreach NGO. And GenX Space is committed to igniting curiosity and preparing the young generation for the space age and solve significant challenges of our time with the help of space, science, and technology. So GenX Space aims to educate and guide curious young minds to achieve their space dreams with space institution, organization, companies, startups, and professionals. So we will again request you all to please visit the official website of GenX Space, because they've got some incredible amount of courses for you, some space clubs that you will all love to join, and then the programs for school students, university students, and the institution. So do check them out, because that's really, really, really amazing. Okay, so moving forward, I will now talk about tomorrow's panel discussion. So tomorrow we have another amazing panel discussion on the topic opportunities and challenges for women in the space sector, which is so much essential for all the women out here. So for this panel, we have some amazing panelists. We have got Abhilasha Purvar, who's the founder and CEO of Blue Sky Analytics. Then we have Thai Hien Nguyen, who's the founder director of Space Conics. And then we also have Kavinji D. Silva, who's the global events lead at Space Hero Limited. So do join us tomorrow. Moving ahead, I would like to mention that there's something really special, and this definitely a good surprise for all of your space enthusiasts. We are going to have a small moon trivia quiz tomorrow with an exciting session by the MVA. Now, to mention what MVA is a Moon Village association, and it's been recently created as a non-governmental organization. It's based in Vienna. MVA partners with all the non-space organizations to promote international discussion and formulation of plans to foster the implementation of Moon Village, and it's creating international, national, and regional networks to engage civil society around the world. So do join us tomorrow for this exciting discussion, for this to just explore what exactly this is, because I'm sure I'll tell you there's so much new surprises for all you guys. So do join us tomorrow for this. And with this, Yeah, also a special note for all the participants. This is the link where you can submit your work for the competitions of World Space Week. Do not forget to submit it before the deadline, and we'll see you tomorrow for amazing surprises and healthy discussions again. Yes, so thank you all for joining us this evening.